March 24th. Thanks for taking the time to watch the Outlaw Pulpit. I'm really glad that you joined me. You know, I want to remind you that a lot of the items that you see in Pastor Bob Beeman's podcast are available through wearemetalwearefamily.com. We personally serve Headbangers Brew at the church I pastor in Wapaka, and so I would suggest that. I personally just placed an order for a t-shirt, a pin, the coffee, and a metal Bible, which is somewhere on that bookshelf behind me. But the reason for this podcast today, the working title of this podcast today, would probably not necessarily have any good title for it. Maybe I would label it When an Apostle Cries. And I say that not because I'm calling myself that, but because of a reference to the Apostle Paul in Scripture. You know, we all go through dark times, and I find it fitting to talk about these things because of Good Friday coming up next week. And the whole origin of that, everything that Christ went through on our behalf, and the things that we go through daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. But if you stick around in humanity long enough, you will go through difficult times. I found myself in that area starting in 2020, faced a lot of medical problems, multiple surgeries. And in reading one of my favorite authors the other day, I read this quote. Now, this is the words of Brennan Manning from a book called Ruthless Trust. He says, "To be grateful for an unanswered prayer, to give thanks in a state of interior desolation, to trust in the love of God in the face of the marvels, cruel circumstances, obscenities, and commonplaces of life is to whisper a doxology in darkness." You know, it's no mystery that we celebrate Easter. We'll be doing that a week from this Sunday. We celebrate Good Friday. You know, for us, it was a good Friday. For Jesus, it was a bad Friday. The things that he went through on our behalf. And he did all of that for us to redeem us, for the resurrection, for new life, for the gospel. And I believe, though, in every situation that Jesus went through, we can somehow relate to that. You see, Good Friday is an interesting day because we see on that Sunday, which was Palm Sunday coming up this week, we see the triumphal entry. But then on Friday, they're yelling, "Crucify him, give us Barabbas," and everything. And it went from a mountaintop experience to a valley, even though I think Jesus knew what was coming. He's Jesus, so of course he knew what was coming. But that's very reflective of our own life. We have mountaintop experiences. Sometimes they go for a long time, but we all know we can't live on the mountaintops, and so we go through the valleys. And the joy of going through the valley is knowing that it's not permanent. And I remind myself of that as well because, as I stated, 2020 was a rough year. 2021 started off with another sinus surgery thing. And, well, quite honestly, today I found out that I'm facing an appendectomy and a few other things because of the ongoing discomfort from previous hernia surgeries. And so this kind of hits close to home, and it makes me wonder a little bit like, well, what do we do? You and I, you know, some people find it easier to cry. Some people find it difficult to cry. Where in Scripture can we find some stories of where people cried? I mean, quite honestly, for some people, it's not a big issue. You just let it rip, and you could be watching a moving commercial and you're teary-eyed. Other people, you know, it's just not so much. And I found that to be true in my own life up until my mom passed. And then I found the tears come a lot easier. But we're reminded of the biggest example of where it was okay to cry, where it's good to cry, when Jesus confronted his friend Lazarus in the grave, and he showed up on the scene, and it just simply says, one of the shortest scriptures in the Bible, Jesus wept. And I think he wept because he remembered all the good times he had with Lazarus. He wept because of the people's love for him that were there on the scene that day. But then I'm reminded of Acts chapter 20, and this is an example of the Apostle Paul, the guy who wrote most of the New Testament, the guy who at one point said women should remain silent. That's cultural. Culture and context is king when studying Scripture. I come from a movement, I'm affiliated with a movement that credentials women, and I'm thankful for that. But for that time in that era, that was right for Paul to say. But that's neither here nor there. Paul seems like just the man's man. He seems like he's in prison, he's out of prison, he's doing things for Christ, he's moving forward. He had this huge Damascus Road experience. But then we find that you start reading him and you're like, okay, so where is this guy a softie? Where is this guy find it's okay to cry? And then Acts chapter 20 lands in your lap and it's like, boom, it's there. This is what the Apostle Paul says to the Ephesians at Miletus. He says, you know how I lived the whole time I was with you. From the first day I came into the province of Asia, I served the Lord with great humility and with tears. And in the midst of severe testing by the plots of my Jewish opponents, you know that I have not hesitated to preach anything. We move down a little further to verse 31, and it says, so be on your guard. Remember that for 3 years I never stopped warning each of you night and day with tears. Verse 36, when Paul had finished speaking, he knelt down with all of them and prayed. They all wept as they embraced him and kissed him. You know, the things in life that we go through, we don't understand. We just don't. I've heard a lot of Christians say, when I get to heaven, I am going to ask God about this or that. And I'm quite confident you won't. I won't, because I won't care at that point anymore because I'm in heaven. But for here and now, I had an interesting conversation with a friend earlier. After all this that I'm going through, and I think this causes us to do these sort of things. Last year, I went through what I would label as a theological tsunami, where it's just everything I'm going through isn't lining up. I know what I believe, and I know what I was raised to believe. I know what I preach. But things weren't lining up. And then this year, all of a sudden now, as of April 14th, I'll be 2 surgeries in. And you can't help but to think, God, what are you telling me? What are you teaching me? What are you pulling me through here that I need to understand? Because we could either get really mad, been through that. We can get hateful. We can get bitter. We can turn our back on the gospel. We can turn our back on Jesus. But like the disciples said, to whom else shall we turn? Or we go with it. We say, God, you're in control, because God is not surprised by anything we go through. And we ask the simple question, God, what are you teaching me? What do you need me to know? And I think that's the better approach. I realize I'm going through it, and maybe a lot of you are going through it as well. And it's just words, but I think they're valid words. I think they are words that really ring true, that we need to just sit back sometimes, go through the valley with them. We're in good company with many, many people in Scripture that went through valleys with Jesus, even though they were prophets, minor prophets, apostles, everybody, the disciples. And just ask that question, God, what do I need to pick up on here? What do I need to slow down and understand regarding this situation? So I hope that is beneficial to you. It's beneficial to me just to talk about it. But certainly if you have any questions, comments, you can email them over to outlawpulpit@gmail.com, and I will reply to you. So I hope you have a great week.